The evening was quiet, the kind of silence that comes when the world outside has finally settled and the streets grow still. Keanu Reeves sat alone in his living room, the glow of a single lamp casting long shadows across the wooden floor. He wasn't preparing for a movie role or going over scripts that night. Instead, he had chosen something simple: scrolling through his phone, catching up on the latest news, fan messages, and updates. It was a rare moment of stillness, a moment where he could retreat from Hollywood's noise and just exist as a man. But then, amidst the usual headlines and casual posts, something caught his eye. A trending video. At first, it seemed harmless, just another influencer chasing attention. But the moment he tapped play, Keanu's world shifted. On screen, a smug young man laughed cruelly, mocking a woman he recognized immediately, his sister. Her struggle with illness, her physical appearance, the way she carried herself, it was all turned into cheap entertainment for millions to laugh at. The words cut deep, not just because they were aimed at someone he loved, but because they exposed a cruelty that Keanu had always despised. For years, Keanu had lived his life with humility and respect, never seeking to hurt others even when the world had been unkind to him. He knew loss, he knew grief, he knew what it meant to endure hardship in silence. And his sister, his gentle, resilient sister, had walked beside him through some of those darkest times. To see her name dragged into the mud for the sake of clicks and shares ignited something within him that he rarely allowed to surface. His calm demeanor, his quiet smile, his forgiving nature, they were still there, but beneath them was now a storm. His hand tightened around the phone as he replayed the video, each cruel laugh from the influencer echoing in the room like a personal attack. It wasn't just a joke. It wasn't just content. It was a deliberate act of humiliation. And Keanu knew that silence was not the answer this time. Still, he didn't shout. He didn't lash out. That wasn't his way. Instead, he leaned back, closed his eyes, and let the anger settle into something sharper, something controlled. If life had taught him anything, it was that revenge wasn't always about fists or shouting matches. Sometimes, the greatest revenge was exposing the truth. Sometimes, it was about letting the arrogant bury themselves with their own pride. He thought about the millions who had seen the video, the ones who had laughed along, and the ones who had shaken their heads in disappointment. This wasn't just about his sister anymore. It was about every person who had been mocked, every person who had been bullied while the world watched in silence. Keanu wasn't going to let this slide. Not because he needed to protect his image, but because he needed to protect something deeper: dignity. Slowly, he opened his eyes and placed the phone down on the table beside him. His living room, once filled with peace, now felt like the beginning of a battlefield. The lamp's soft glow seemed harsher, shadows longer, as if the room itself understood what was about to unfold. He knew the path ahead wouldn't be easy. The influencer was riding high on fame, his followers blind to the harm he caused, his arrogance growing with each passing day. But Keanu had something the young man lacked: patience, wisdom, and a reputation that carried weight far beyond social media. He didn't need to fight fire with fire. He needed to fight cruelty with truth. And in doing so, he would show not only the bully but the entire world what it meant to stand for something greater than yourself. That night, Keanu didn't sleep much. Instead, he sat by his window, watching the city lights flicker in the distance. His mind raced, not with rage, but with plans. How do you take down a bully who thrives on attention? How do you expose the emptiness behind the mockery? As the hours passed, an idea began to take shape, a way to confront the cruelty head-on, not with violence, not with more insults, but with a response so undeniable, so powerful, that it would leave the bully with nowhere to hide. He knew what he had to do. His sister deserved better. The world deserved better. And Keanu Reeves was ready to deliver it. The following morning, sunlight crept into Keanu's home, spilling through the curtains as if determined to push away the shadows of the night before. Yet, inside, the storm that had ignited within him remained unshaken. Keanu Reeves had always carried himself as a man of serenity, the kind of soul who absorbed pain quietly and turned it into resilience. But today was different. Today, his silence felt heavier, his thoughts sharper, and his purpose unmistakable. He moved slowly through his kitchen, making coffee, yet his hands trembled ever so slightly with contained energy. Every sip of the bitter drink only reminded him of the bitter words that influencer had spat against his sister. He replayed the clip in his mind again and again, not because he enjoyed the punishment, but because he needed to feel it, needed to let that anger burn long enough to forge it into something precise. The world expected Keanu to shrug things off, to walk away, but deep down, he knew this was a moment where walking away would mean surrender. And Keanu Reeves was not about to surrender. He remembered his sister's voice, soft, encouraging, filled with love. She had been there for him during the hardest years of his life, when tragedy struck and the world seemed intent on breaking him down. She had carried her own battles quietly, bravely, never seeking pity, never asking for recognition. To see her ridiculed in front of millions felt like a desecration of everything she had endured with dignity. That influencer had not just mocked her. He had mocked the strength of survivors, the beauty of kindness, the quiet resilience that people like her embodied. As Keanu set his cup down, his eyes hardened with a resolve that few had ever seen in him outside of the screen. The man the world saw in interviews, the polite, humble, softly spoken figure, was still there. But behind those eyes now lived something else, the protector, the brother, the man who would stand against cruelty, no matter how subtle or loud it appeared. Keanu wasn't reckless. He didn't believe in fighting fire with fire. To strike the bully publicly with insults of his own would only fuel the man's ego, give him more of the attention he craved. No, this had to be something different, calculated, deliberate, and impossible to dismiss. He began by making calls, reaching out not to Hollywood executives or journalists, but to people who understood the weight of online cruelty, people who had spent their lives advocating against bullying and harassment. He asked questions. He listened. He pieced together the psychology of men like the influencer, driven by fame, blinded by their hunger for validation, addicted to the sound of laughter even if it came at someone else's expense. Keanu knew the influencer's weakness wasn't strength or talent. His weakness was exposure. He thrived in a world where no one truly challenged his cruelty, where people clapped or clicked without realizing the cost of their amusement. To dismantle him, Keanu needed to flip the stage, to make the world see the man not as a comedian or a trendsetter, but as what he truly was, a coward hiding behind laughter. As the hours passed, Keanu's plan began to take form. He wouldn't confront the bully directly, not yet. Instead, he would use his platform, his presence, his quiet but undeniable influence to redirect the spotlight. He would stand beside his sister, not as a movie star defending a family member, but as a human being demanding accountability. His sister had suffered enough in silence. Now the world would hear her story, her strength, and see the stark contrast between her courage and the influencer's cruelty. Keanu envisioned the moment clearly. The bully, stripped of his power, forced to face the consequences of his actions not through retaliation but through truth. This wasn't revenge in the traditional sense. It was justice wrapped in compassion, delivered with a precision that would leave no doubt about who truly held the power. That evening, Keanu sat once more in his living room, though now the lamp felt less like a witness to pain and more like a beacon of intent. He closed his eyes and took a deep breath, centering himself in the calm he would need to carry this through. The storm within him wasn't about destruction, it was about clarity. He would not let rage guide his hand. He would let love for his sister, and for every person who had ever been bullied into silence, light the path forward. The influencer thought he had won with one viral video. But what he didn't know was that he had awakened the quiet strength of a man who had spent a lifetime walking through fire and emerging stronger every time. Keanu Reeves was ready, and when he moved, the world would feel it. Days turned into nights, but Keanu Reeves was not one to waste time once his mind was set. While the influencer basked in the fleeting glow of his viral video, celebrating the cruel mockery of Keanu's sister as if it were an achievement, Keanu was quietly constructing something much larger. To him, this wasn't about personal vengeance. This was about building a moment so undeniable, so piercing, that the world would be forced to stop, to watch, and to question their own role in amplifying cruelty. Keanu understood something the influencer did not. Fame was fragile, and respect was everything. A career built on humiliation could rise overnight, but it could just as easily shatter when the truth was laid bare. And Keanu, with decades of resilience behind him, was prepared to expose that truth in a way no one could ignore. The first move was subtle. Keanu reached out to a well-known charity organization that advocated for victims of bullying and harassment. He offered not just money, but his presence, his voice. A private meeting was arranged, and soon his team worked on creating an event. a panel discussion, part documentary, part public conversation about the unseen scars left behind by online cruelty. It was designed to shine a light on stories too often buried, to give survivors a platform to speak their truth. The irony was not lost on him. The influencer had mocked his sister to gain views, but Keanu would now use that very same platform of the internet to dismantle the culture of cruelty the man represented. And in doing so, he would remind the world that compassion had a power far greater than ridicule. But Keanu didn't stop there. Behind the scenes, he instructed his team to ensure that the influencer would receive an invitation to the event. The man believed he was being recognized for his edgy humor, for his rising online presence. To him, this was a ticket to legitimacy, a chance to rub shoulders with Hollywood's elite and bask in the glow of Keanu Reeves' attention. He accepted without hesitation, blind to the reality of what awaited him. For Keanu, this was not a trap of humiliation, it was a mirror. A chance for the influencer to see himself reflected against the very thing he had mocked. Real human suffering, real resilience, real dignity. Whether the man realized it or not, he was about to walk into a storm he had no control over. The day of the event arrived with a kind of quiet anticipation that precedes something monumental. The venue was not extravagant, but it was meaningful. A large community hall filled with survivors, advocates, journalists, and ordinary people who had lived through the sting of public mockery. Cameras were set, lights adjusted, and whispers filled the air. Keanu arrived not with the fanfare of a movie star, but with the calm grace of a man who carried purpose. He shook hands, embraced those who came forward to share their stories, and quietly encouraged his sister, who stood bravely by his side. She had agreed to speak, not because she sought attention, but because she understood the power of her truth. For years, she had lived with her illness, with whispers behind her back, with people who did not understand. But now, with her brother beside her, she was ready to let the world see her strength. As the seats filled and the event began, the influencer took his place among the audience, smug and confident, unaware that the spotlight he craved would soon burn in ways he could not have imagined. He looked around at the cameras, the crowd, the famous face of Keanu Reeves on stage, and for a moment, he believed this was his triumph. But Keanu's eyes, calm yet piercing, met his across the room, and the influencer felt a flicker of unease he couldn't quite explain. Something about that look told him this was not the celebration he had expected. This was something else entirely. The setup was complete. The stage was ready. And soon, the world would see the difference between cruelty and courage, between mockery and truth. The theater was cloaked in anticipation that night, its glowing marquee illuminating the street below with letters spelling out "Special Charity Screening, hosted by Keanu Reeves." Fans and media crowded the entrance, their camera flashes flickering like lightning against the velvet ropes. Inside, the air was thick with curiosity. Something about Keanu's sudden decision to host an event had already sparked whispers online. Everyone knew Keanu wasn't one for grand displays. But tonight, there was purpose in the way he moved, as if each step had been rehearsed for a stage much larger than film. His sister, Kim, sat in the front row, unaware of the storm that was about to break. She clutched her hands nervously, still carrying the sting of the cruel mockery she had endured online. When Keanu walked on stage, the audience erupted into applause. He stood silently for a moment, letting the cheers settle before leaning into the microphone. His face was calm, but his eyes burned with a quiet fire. "Tonight," he began, "is not about me. It's about respect, about kindness, and about reminding the world that words, just like actions, carry weight." The audience listened intently, their excitement shifting into curiosity. A massive projector screen behind him flickered to life, revealing a grainy screenshot of the cruel post that had mocked Kim. Gasps rippled through the crowd, reporters' pens froze mid-scribble, and the bully's digital footprint was suddenly exposed under the brightest of lights. Keanu's voice sharpened, not with anger, but with conviction. "This post may look small, a few words, typed without thought, but it was a dagger aimed at someone I love. My sister has fought battles most of you will never see. Illness, pain, days where hope was her only medicine. And yet, a stranger thought it was amusing to mock her." The room went silent. Even the rustle of programs stopped. Keanu didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. His measured tone carried more weight than any shouting ever could. On the screen, the screenshot scrolled to reveal the bully's username, and then, surprisingly, their old public posts, boastful, cruel, targeting others too. Keanu had come prepared, and he was going to strip this tormentor's mask away. The tension was palpable as Keanu continued. We live in a world where cruelty hides behind screens, where bullies think their words vanish into the void. But tonight, we bring them into the light. He gestured to the audience. I don't show this to humiliate one person. I show this because silence gives cruelty its power. And I refuse to be silent. The cameras captured every moment, streaming it live across countless social media platforms. The bully, watching from wherever they were, surely felt the ground beneath them shaking. The narrative was no longer theirs, it was Keanu's. The world was seeing the truth. Then Keanu softened, his gaze sweeping back to his sister. Kim, you are not defined by their words. You are defined by your courage, your resilience, and your heart. No insult can diminish you. And to anyone who has ever been mocked, ridiculed, or dismissed, know this, you are not alone. His words hung in the air like a promise, echoing in every corner of the theater. The crowd erupted in applause, this time louder, longer, more powerful than before. Reporters rushed to capture the story, fans stood to their feet, and Kim's eyes brimmed with tears, not of sadness, but of pride. The confrontation was over, and Keanu had won, not with fists or fury, but with truth and dignity, turning the spotlight back onto compassion and stripping cruelty of its disguise. The confrontation was over. The bully's empire of arrogance had crumbled in front of the entire world, and now the silence that followed felt almost as powerful as Keanu's words themselves. The cafe's tension dissolved slowly, replaced by a strange mixture of relief and admiration. People whispered to each other, eyes wide, recording everything on their phones as if they had just witnessed history. Keanu's sister, who had been standing quietly to the side, now stepped forward, her face flushed with a combination of embarrassment, pride, and tears. For years, she had carried the burden of being mocked, belittled, and reduced to the subject of cruel jokes. But tonight, in a single moment, her brother had shattered that narrative and replaced it with one of dignity and strength. She looked at him, her voice trembling. Keanu, you didn't have to, but he stopped her gently with a hand on her shoulder, smiling softly. I did. Because no one hurts you and gets away with it. His voice wasn't angry anymore. It was calm, steady, the voice of a protector who had done what needed to be done. The cafe erupted into applause, not the kind born from entertainment, but from respect. Strangers stood and clapped, some even shouting his name, others cheering for his sister, who finally received the support she had long deserved. The bully, who once commanded attention through cruelty, now slinked away in shame, his face pale and his body hunched. It was almost poetic. The man who thrived on humiliating others had been humiliated in the truest, rawest sense. Keanu didn't even spare him another glance. Revenge had been delivered not with fists, but with truth and compassion, a strike far more devastating than any physical blow. And in that moment, Keanu proved that true revenge wasn't about destroying someone else's life, it was about reclaiming the dignity they tried to steal. His sister hugged him tightly, burying her face in his chest as tears rolled down. For the first time in a long time, she felt safe, seen, and defended in a world that had so often mocked her silence. But Keanu wasn't finished. As he held her, he turned to the crowd and spoke once more, his voice carrying the weight of experience and pain. You see, he said, people think it's easy to hide behind screens, to say cruel things, to mock people they'll never meet. But those words, they leave scars. And sometimes those scars cut deeper than anyone realizes. My sister didn't deserve to be the target of ridicule. No one does. So if you've ever laughed at someone else's pain, I hope you think twice the next time, because kindness doesn't cost you anything, but cruelty can destroy lives. The cafe went quiet again, his words hanging in the air like a moral carved in stone. Strangers who once might have laughed at such online bullying now found themselves reflecting, their own past actions rushing back to them. Keanu's message wasn't just about his sister, it was about all the silent victims who never got the chance to defend themselves. That night didn't just end with applause. News of the confrontation spread like wildfire. Videos uploaded to social media captured every second of Keanu's takedown of the bully, and within hours, it had gone viral. Headlines flashed across the internet. Keanu Reeves defends sister against online bully, shuts him down in public. Millions watched as he dismantled cruelty with nothing but words and courage, and the effect was profound. Comment sections, usually a breeding ground for sarcasm and toxicity, became flooded with messages of support, not only for Keanu and his sister, but for everyone who had ever been mocked or belittled. It was as if the world had been waiting for a moment like this, a reminder that kindness could still win, that cruelty could still be defeated. For Keanu, it wasn't about fame or headlines. It was about family, about loyalty, and about reminding the world of something it had long forgotten, that love and respect were stronger than hate. Later that evening, when the cameras were gone and the world had already begun writing its own narrative, Keanu and his sister sat together on the balcony of his home, overlooking the quiet city lights. The chaos had faded into silence, and for the first time in a long while, his sister's laughter rang out. Genuine, unforced, free. Keanu watched her with a soft smile, sipping his tea, his heart lighter than it had been in years. "You know," she said, playfully nudging him, "you didn't just defend me. You gave me back my voice." Keanu leaned back, his eyes reflecting the stars. "That was always yours. You just needed someone to remind you." In that quiet moment, revenge had transformed into something greater: redemption, healing, and the restoration of dignity. The aftermath wasn't destruction, it was renewal. And that, perhaps, was the most powerful revenge of all. The weeks that followed were nothing short of transformative, not just for Kim, but for thousands of people who had watched the entire ordeal unfold. When Keanu Reeves first stood up against the bully who mocked his sister, no one could have imagined how far the ripples of that confrontation would spread. Now, the story had taken on a life of its own. Media outlets replayed the scene over and over again. Keanu confronting the bully on stage with calm but devastating eloquence, exposing his cruelty in front of a live audience. But beyond the headlines and viral clips, something deeper was happening. Conversations about online harassment, cyberbullying, and the abuse of power were suddenly in the spotlight. Kim herself found her voice again. For months she had shrunk from the world, avoiding social platforms, afraid of how vicious people could be. But seeing her brother stand beside her with such unshakable conviction lit something within her. She began to write about her experiences, not in anger, but in truth. Her first essay, published in a popular magazine, was titled "When Words Wound: Living Through Online Cruelty." It was raw, honest, and vulnerable. Within days, letters poured in from people around the world who had faced similar abuse, thanking her for her courage. For the first time, Kim realized that what once felt like her personal pain could be transformed into a voice for change. Keanu, watching her reclaim her strength, felt a deep sense of pride that far outweighed any revenge he had delivered. The bully, on the other hand, was experiencing the opposite side of that same ripple effect. His career, once thriving on shock humor and cruel jabs, collapsed almost overnight. Brands dropped their sponsorships, his bookings dried up, and his audience abandoned him. At first, he tried to lash out, blaming cancel culture, portraying himself as the victim. But no one was listening. Eventually, in a desperate attempt at salvaging his image, he issued a public apology. It was shaky, hollow at first, but after months of silence, something changed. He disappeared from the spotlight completely and began working with local schools on anti-bullying campaigns. Some said it was a publicity stunt. Others believed it was genuine repentance. Regardless, the cycle of cruelty had been broken because someone dared to stand up and say, "Enough." Keanu's role in all this was quiet. He didn't bask in the praise or celebrate his victory. Instead, he doubled down on his philosophy of kindness. He donated anonymously to organizations that provided mental health resources for victims of cyberbullying. He funded scholarships in his sister's name for students studying digital ethics. And he continued doing what he always did best, choosing empathy over ego, compassion over cruelty. In interviews, when pressed about the incident, he simply said, "Sometimes the best way to take revenge is not with anger, but by protecting the ones you love and changing the world that hurt them." His words struck a chord, becoming a quote shared across posters, memes, and speeches. Years later, when people looked back on the story, they didn't remember the bully's cruel joke. They remembered Keanu standing tall beside his sister, turning a moment of pain into a legacy of hope. Kim went on to become a respected writer and advocate, her career no longer defined by what was done to her, but by what she did with her voice. The Bully faded into obscurity, a cautionary tale of how cruelty may earn attention but never respect. And Keanu Reeves. He became once again the embodiment of the belief that true strength lies not in how you strike back, but in how you lift others up. In the end, revenge wasn't about destroying an enemy, it was about rewriting the story. And Keanu's story, intertwined with his sister's, would inspire countless others to stand up against cruelty, to defend the vulnerable, and to remember that kindness is the most powerful act of defiance there is.